In 1996, in Abilene, Texas, after finishing a late shift at the local newspaper, Brian Bethel, a seasoned journalist, had parked outside the old communications building. He took a moment to savor the quiet. An otherworldly atmosphere saturated the night, chills running along his spine when a sudden tapping on his window stirred him from his thoughts. Two boys, around 10, stood beside his car. Their presence was unsettling. They wore outdated clothes, their heads slightly bowed. Brian rolled down his window halfway, curious but cautious. "Can we get a ride?" the platinum-haired boy asked. His voice was calm but flat, like he was saying something he had practiced many times. Brian's instincts screamed, "Be afraid. Be very afraid." But he felt an unexplainable pull towards them. "Where are you heading? Our mother forgot us at home. We need to see the movie," the other boy said, a mirrored image of his mate, his voice just as flat. Brian looked at the movie sign. The last showings were almost over. The movie they wanted to see had already started, 45 minutes ago in fact, and the teenagers sounded much older than they appeared to be. "It's too late for a movie, kids. Where do you live? Just let us in. We won't take long," the first boy insisted. "Just let us in." His tone grew forceful as he repeated, "Just let us in." Brian felt a shiver. There was something off about them. It wasn't just their flat voices or odd persistence. Then, as if his instincts flipped a switch, he noticed their eyes, black like endless voids, absorbed the faint, flickering marquee light, but reflected nothing back. Brian's heart pounded. He gripped the steering wheel, every fiber of his being shouted to get away. "No, you need to go home," he said, voice shaky. "Let us in," the boys said in unison. Their pitch increased. Their eyes bored into him with a chilling intensity. In a panic, Brian slammed the car into reverse. Tires screeched as he sped away. He glanced in the rearview mirror and expected to see the boys receding into the distance. Instead, they were gone, as if they'd never existed. Back in his apartment, Brian locked every door and window. His heart still raced. He sat at his desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He had to document this, to share the inexplicable encounter with the world. Of course, people would read his story with skepticism. But that night had carved itself into his memory, a dark mystery lurking at the edge of his reality. As he typed, questions gnawed at him. What were they? Why did their presence fill him with such dread? And most disturbingly, what would have happened if he had let them in? He never found the answers. But his story, shared in hushed tones and late-night discussions, fueled the urban legend of the black-eyed children. Bethel wrote about this unsettling encounter for the Abilene News Reporter, and in the decades since, stories about the black-eyed children have cropped up in several countries. Some details change from one account to the next, but scholars and urban legend enthusiasts alike agree that the figures are an example of death personified as a child. These malevolent, otherworldly creatures exploit a widely held belief that children are inherently good. Defenses lowered, their victims allow them inside, inviting death and destruction upon themselves. At least that's the idea. Later, there were more accounts reported, claiming encounters with the black-eyed children. One of the most interesting accounts I found comes from an article on Mysterious Universe that quotes a victim who was at a rest stop in Nevada. When 3 kids approached, the man pulled a knife for defense and began to open his door. The kids did the rest for him. They yanked him out of the car, and in a panic, the man fought back. He stabbed one of them twice, but there was no reaction. Or blood. Instead, the black-eyed child merely told him, "Next time," and they walked off. The children are described as speaking in an emotionless voice more mature than expected for their apparent age. They often repeat the same phrase, and they are insistent on being led inside, whether it's into someone's house or car. The children plead at first, asking to make a phone call, use the bathroom, or catch a ride, but eventually become more aggressive, says Bridget Burke, an adjunct professor of religion at Montclair State University who has written about the urban legend. "It's scary because we don't know what they want. We don't know what they're going to do when we let them in. There are stories of people who have let them in, and then disastrous things happen," Burke says. According to the tales, catastrophes such as fatal accidents and cancer diagnosis follow in the children's wake. They're kind of in between. They look like kids, but not really, Burke says. It feels creepy because they sort of look like something that we expect, but they're not. She adds, in myth, children are supposed to represent a new beginning, a new possibility, a new birth. That's not what these are. Burke says that one of her friends experienced a black-eyed child pounding on her door long before she had ever heard of the figures or read Burke's scholarly research on the phenomenon. Burke's friend lived alone in a small, secluded cabin nestled deep in the woods, about 15 miles from the nearest town. A writer and a recluse, she appreciated the silence and isolation of her surroundings. One night, as she was reading near her wood-burning stove, she heard a slow, deliberate knock on her door. It startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not in that weather. Snowfall had blanketed the forest that week, and a deep cold had settled in, turning the atmosphere hauntingly still. Initially thinking it might be a lost traveler or someone in need, she approached the door cautiously. She peeked through the small window but saw nothing, just the snow-covered porch and trees beyond. Thinking she imagined it, she returned to her chair. Minutes later, there came 3 more knocks, harder this time. She went back to the door, this time switching on the porch light. When she looked out, 2 children stood at the edge of the porch, just outside the light's glow. They looked to be around 10 to 12 years old, dressed oddly for the weather. Light jackets, thin pants, and no gloves. Their heads were tilted down, hiding their faces. She opened the inner door slightly, but kept the storm door locked. "Can we come in?" one of them asked. "We need to use the phone." The voice was flat, no emotion. She asked them where their parents were, but they didn't respond. The second child then said, "Let us in. We're cold." Still, their heads remained down. Something in her gut screamed not to open the door. She described a wave of dread, an almost primal fear that overtook her, irrational but overpowering. When she hesitated again, one of them lifted his head. His skin was pale, ashen, almost corpse-like. But what shook her to her core were the eyes, entirely black. No whites, no irises, just shiny obsidian voids. She slammed the door shut immediately and backed away, heart racing. They didn't knock again. They just stood there, for nearly 10 minutes. Eventually, she mustered the courage to glance out the window. They were gone. The next morning, she found footprints in the snow leading up to her door. But, strangely, none going back into the forest. They just ended on the porch. She called Bridget Burke soon after, disturbed and shaken. Bridget, having researched paranormal phenomena, immediately recognized the signs. Black-eyed children. Her friend moved out of the cabin a few months later. She never experienced another encounter, but claimed to feel a strange presence watching her for weeks after the event. In most black-eyed children stories and legends, the children can be found around highways, streets, and residential homes and stalk passers-by or residents of the property to cause psychological harm. No particular members are known except for Josh Collins, his sister Emma Collins, and friends Joe and Remy, who died of foul play while getting lost in the woods while playing hide-and-go-seek. On streets and highways, they have been reported to appear as lost children or hitchhikers, only to attack those who stop out of concern for them. Some argue black-eyed children are ghosts. Others claim they are demons, vampires, or practitioners of evil magic. Some UFO lore depict them as human-alien hybrids. Others believe they are children playing rather cruel pranks on people. Various studies have been conducted into the history of black-eyed child sightings, but it is currently unknown when the first sighting was reported or even where the legend originated. A fact to note is that the legend of black-eyed children existed before Bethel's encounter, though this encounter definitely made the legend more popular. Some paranormal researchers claim to have found oral accounts from the 1980s or even earlier of people encountering children who induced unnatural fear, had cold or hypnotic voices, or whose eyes weren't right. These stories were likely passed around as local legends or told during campfire ghost stories, and were not well documented until the internet era. However, these accounts often lacked the consistent details we now associate with black-eyed children, like needing permission to enter, pitch black eyes, and emotionless speech. And these accounts weren't collected or categorized under a distinct label like black-eyed children. Moreover, similar encounters and motifs appear earlier in folklore and anecdotal stories. European and Appalachian folklore sometimes mentions children or beings with unnatural eyes, often seen as omens or spirits. Tales of changeling children in Celtic mythology describe children who seem off, emotionally flat, eerily quiet, and strange-eyed. In Native American legends, there are entities or spirits that mimic human children, but with features that reveal their true nature, often their eyes. These may not describe black-eyed children specifically, but they reflect a recurring archetype: innocent-looking children who are not what they appear to be. To conclude, the black-eyed children legend lacks definitive evidence of their existence, only testimonies which many dismiss as attempts to seek fame. However, such phenomena aren't black and white, and if they do exist, concrete proof would likely be very hard to find, if not impossible. Therefore, I believe there should be some benefit of the doubt. Moreover, I think the similar characters in many pre-modern folklores help the case of black-eyed children's existence. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments.